My name is Richard Portalance from EdGate, and today we're going to be talking with Dave Berg from ImBlaze, which is part of Big Picture Learning. And we're going to do an interview, and we're trying to understand a little bit better about some of the technologies and some of the innovations that are coming into the market and why some of them are sticky and some are not. And we're going to be running a few interviews. And then in a few weeks, we're also going to be hosting a webinar. It's going to be on June 20th. And we invite everybody who listens to this to join us for that webinar. Dave will take part, as well as a few people on the side of education. We have a high school principal. We have someone who's running a online learning academy, and we have another edtech vendor who is in the space of K-12, who's doing some pretty innovative stuff, and having some success of actually being utilized within the classroom. And ultimately, we all want to see these, assessments and outcomes and making a difference, right? And so that's what we want to talk about today. And so to start this off, we're going to get to know Dave a little bit and get into his head as the curator of ImBlaze. So, Dave, could you give us a little introduction of who you are and what got you to big picture learning?
Sure. So thanks for having me. I am David Berg. My current title is Director of Digital Innovation for Big Picture Learning. So just an aside, Big Picture Learning is a nationwide nonprofit organization. It's been around for over 25 years with the intention of redesigning schools, particularly high schools, focusing that redesign work on student-centeredness, on student interest, and on building relationships. We think that as schools are evolving and should be evolving, those things, relationships and student interest, need to be pretty central to what's going on, particularly in high school. The other key component of the design is that relates to both of those things is that we think kids should get out into the real world. We think that cloistering young people inside the walls of a comprehensive high school has some value, but there's also some loss to that, and getting kids out into the real world to learn things that they're interested in by actual practitioners, with actual practitioners, mentors in the real world, as well as building social capital, building those networks, is a critical new deliverable that schools can be providing for young people in a really equitable way. So I'm a former high school teacher or science teacher, U.S. government teacher, and worked at a big picture school back in the day. And that big picture school had an internship program. It was in Sacramento. It is still in Sacramento, California. And the internship program was 2 days per week, all 4 years of high school. So fully 40% of all academic minutes for that school, kids were spent out in the real world. It's a big commitment and to the idea of real world learning. And it was something that we were really proud of, but it was also really hard to manage. Managing what I call a distributed learning environment where kids are out in the world learning creates some complexity challenges. And so I started to hack together some solutions for that because of some prior work experience and comfort with database design. I started to hack together some solutions to that. Those solutions became known by other schools. Other schools wanted something similar, and that evolved to eventually what is now ImBlaze. So ImBlaze is a tool that enables schools to grow their real-world learning programs, and there's a bit of a lexicon problem, like real-world learning, internship, apprenticeship. It's like the work-based learning. There's lots of different words that sort of encapsulate the same kind of thing, and so we fall back to real-world learning to try to absorb all of those words, those phrases. And so the tool itself is enabling schools to grow their real-world learning programs in a way that ensures equity of opportunity for young people, while also collecting this new emergent data around what young people are doing out in the real world so that we can have that data, schools can have that data to help drive practice and emphasize the importance of real-world learning. Yeah, I'll leave it there for the moment.
Well, that's a great start. Thank you. A few things that kind of I latched on to. I'm curious about your work in Sacramento, the outcome numbers. So when you talk about the data, David, um,
Mhm.
how did that affect the students' learning and outcomes through that 40% of time spent outside the classroom?
Yeah, big picture schools that have this design are historically in communities that are underserviced, undersupported, and oftentimes have a variety of other challenges related to student success by traditional metrics. So as a result, coming in and saying, okay, well, learning in school is having some pretty low outcomes here. Let's try to break that system. Let's try to get kids learning outside of school has shown good results, meaning graduation rates are higher, student engagement is higher, students engagement in back in school subject matter courses is higher because of the relevance of going out in the real world. I like an anecdotal story related to this that I tell. When I was an advisor and an earth science teacher at this school, I taught earth science. Like geology is kind of my thing, right? I had a kid who's in my advisory who was going to an internship with a practicing geologist, like somebody who's actually doing the work, right? And and that work was like an inch wide, a mile deep, to overuse a geology metaphor a bit, I think. Um, and but every time I would visit that kid at their internship, me, the earth science teacher, would learn something about geology from the kid because that kid was being mentored by an actual practitioner in the field, not me as an, quasi-academic educator teaching the subject matter to California state standards. So um, when that happens, you get, increased engagement in school, better attendance, and then I think the most important thing is kids having a better sense of their direction of what they want to do. They don't have fantasies about what the workplace is like and what their vision of their workplace. They actually have experience there. And lastly, they have then the social capital to really start to leverage that. They have people that they can call up and say, hey, I need, I'm interested in this work. I need an internship while I'm in college. I need an apprenticeship now that I'm out of high school. I need a job. And they could have that network to build upon to persevere through college, to move up through the jobs ladder, and so forth.
Yeah.
So the success is great. What that doesn't necessarily always show is like highest test scores, because that's the thing. Those are the places we work. Those are the schools that we work in. This tool that we've built is about building social capital.
Okay.
That means it could be a tool for good or a tool for evil, as far as I'm concerned. Meaning, we could sell ImBlaze strictly to private schools who offer internships for the highest functioning kids who are the most successful in the traditional system. And they are, for example, they're on a path for early graduation from high school. We don't know what else to do with them anymore. Let's give them an internship. Great. ImBlaze would super help with that. But those kids already have all the tools in the toolbox that they need to be
Right.
successful. They probably already have a pretty good social capital network around them. And so we tend to really focus on the equity part of this and really bridging the opportunity gaps. We want all kids to have access to adults out in the real world that are doing the work that they're interested in.
That's a terrific place to start, and certainly it's well needed. You're filling a huge gap in the marketplace, right? That these students who are underserved are getting these opportunities. And were you finding that more of those students end up attending college or go directly to the workforce? Was there some kind of numbers that came out?
I'd have to look and remember what the numbers were. I think that the I, it's an interesting question. Like my highest in one of the cycles that I worked there, because we worked in 4-year cycles, the kid who had the highest GPA was the highest GPA for the school, summa cum laude or whatever that's called, and could have gotten into any, like one of the requirements is that you at least apply to colleges, and got into every college he applied to, didn't go to college. It's like, I look at the reality. I'm really interested in computer engineering. I look at the reality that I could walk out of high school because of my internships doing computer coding. I could walk out of high school and get a 6-figure job. Like, why do I need college? And why do I need, his parents were teachers. Like, why do I need college debt? Like, I just don't see it. And I had to like okay. Like it's hard for me to argue that.
Yeah.
So um, the metrics are better. Graduation rates are higher. Exactly how much higher? I don't know off the top of my head. That was also 15 years ago, so I'm trying to remember it now. But our graduation, it was considered a highly successful school in California.
Okay. Fantastic. So and those outcomes, right? They talk about the program
Hmm.
efficacy that talks about and what we want to kind of get to is, how does some of the technologies that are being deployed affect those outcomes? So you built in
Yep.
Blaze um, through the Big Picture Learning Group. So this is kind of an innovation delivered by Big Picture Learning. And we know that you're with one particular school, Dr. Rubin, out in Uxbridge, Massachusetts, who's running an internship program. How is ImBlaze being deployed, and what
Yeah.
kind of effect is it having on their program?
Yeah, so tools matter. The analogy I say is that if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. So if you don't have tools to do disruptive innovation stuff, disruptive, like if you don't have tools that promote disruptive innovation, you don't do disruptive innovation. You need the systems, and the tools don't have to be digital tools, but you need those tools. Think about, Uber is just an app, right? Uber disrupted the transportation sector, Uber and Lyft. And the reason is because they provided a tool to enable anybody to transport anybody else in a car. Like and from there it grew, but like that's a disruptive innovation. If someone had not built the app, Uber, like that isn't able to happen. So in our case, managing real world learning or internship programs is complicated. It is outside of the natural skill set of a single subject teacher. Um, the metrics are a little fuzzy, like what makes a good internship, what's not, like how many hours, like all sorts of things. It's hard. It's been up until this point hard to track like how successful internships are when they are imposed on a kid, as opposed to when kids pursue them based on their interests. And so what we see, we're in a big growth curve right now. We're seeing lots of programs taking on and blazing. We're really excited about all that. And it has to do with the fact that schools, practitioners intuitively know that there are limits to what they could provide kids inside the school building. And they intuitively know, because they love young people and they want to see them set off to be successful, they intuitively know that getting them out into the real world to experience the things that they're interested in and to learn from other adults other than parents and teachers is a net positive, is a good thing for kids. How to do that, like how to actually implement that, is just really, it's like trying to learn Chinese, learn Mandarin. Like oh my God, I don't even know where to start. And so that's where we come in, is the tool to help schools build out a database of opportunities, of
Yep.
potential opportunities, and then the tool it also has embedded in it a system that really supports equitable processes from going from student interest to exploring that opportunity, an opportunity like with a shadow day or whatever, and then converting that to some sort of an internship or an apprenticeship, and thinking about what are the goals, what are some of the outcomes we expect for that, and then tracking attendance so that kids are showing up and that you're getting good mentor feedback along the way. So that's how schools use it. Um, we have now around 250 schools that are, or programs, they're not all schools actually, that use ImBlaze. We've logged about 2 million student hours of attendance on the platform, which equates to around 500,000 student days out at internships on the platform. So we have no reason to not believe this, but we suspect that we have the largest data set of actual student real world learning experience. And researchers are starting to get interested in that. We're interested in looking at that large data set for AI to explore. And so, yeah, I don't know if I answered that question, but I
That's
mean, Uxbridge is a great example. Traditional high school that also recognizes the importance of doing something non-traditional, which is getting kids out into the real world. And they place from the leadership on down, they place a lot of value in that. Like, okay, we need to make sure our kids have mentors. We need to make sure our kids get out in the real world. This is a priority. They didn't know how to implement that. And then ImBlaze came along for them, and now they are able to do that. And the other piece to that is that there are now in a variety of states, state policies that are unsupported with solutions to implement them, but they're state policies around, hey, kids should graduate with at least 60 hours of some sort of work-based learning experience. Like that, all kids should have, like they're not yet mandates, but they're policies that are in place that are trying to push that idea of work-based learning being a key deliverable of schools, but no other way to solve that. We don't have real competition in terms of what the tool that we provide.
No,
Hopefully that answered. That was a long meandering.
no, those are great answers because you gave a lot of information there, and it's well beyond what I was asking, which is terrific. And it gave me some insight into Blaze. I'm curious, how important are you mentioned academic standards, and I'm curious how important are academic standards and CTE standards in this case for student learning? Is there the development, or are there some of those standards that are existing for the internships that are helping to guide what these students are doing and learning?
Yeah, so like there are credits that can be afforded to kids for 120 hours of of work-based learning experience. I think that that's an important question, and that's the piece that's really emergent right now. Is we have this large data set that we can really look at what represents quality in terms of learning or experience that can then transition to learning back in the single subject classroom. We have the data, but only we have the data, so there's not really enough policy out there around what qualifies as high quality real world learning. So unfortunately, in the current state, educators intuitively know that this is important, but they don't know how to measure that importance. And so they'll do things like, work experience. Great, you got work experience. Like that's cool. You got work. Like that's not a bad thing. Like, okay, you got work experience. But what does that even mean? It probably means something positive for the young person, but what does that actually mean? What's the matrix? Like, how do we measure that? How are there components to that? Is there a rubric for it or something? Like, there's not that yet out there in this space, and that has to do with the emergence of work-based learning as being important that relative recently, the fairly distributed nature of education in the United States, with each state having their own policy about that. The good news about it, though, the hopeful news, is that regardless of your political persuasion, the idea of kids getting out into the real world and work-based learning seems to be like one of the few commonly
Universal.
agreed upon, uniformly consensus things about, like, oh yeah, that's a good thing for kids.
Yeah.
There could be different from a more left-leaning progressive perspective. It may be around like, bridging opportunity gaps and inequities and things like that. From the more conservative or right-leaning side of the equation, it might be more around employability and getting kids out, and into career pathways and things like that. Like, but either way, the net effect is like, yeah, no, this is important. We need to do this. And so we're at this junction in time right now where we see this as a pretty transformative, but also pretty doable thing for education policymakers to address. It's a kind of a win-win for them.
And no, that's fantastic, and it kind of it makes a ton of sense, right? I think people understand the importance of real world experience. I know from a personal anecdote, my daughter decided not to go to college. She's in an apprenticeship program now,
Mhm.
and it's a 2-year program at a hair salon. And I'm just so impressed with the level of uh, teaching that goes on. Every
Hmm.
Monday she's in a course. She's bringing in people who want to have a certain thing done. Whether it's roots touch up or whatever.
Right.
They'll focus on it and they'll teach some of those skills. And then she has the rest of the week where she's doing hands-on work. And I've seen this amazing growth. And within that culture, there's assessment, right? She has to
Yeah.
be at a certain level of proficiency to be able to work on a
Right.
human. And so, as you were talking about, there's still this amorphous area of uncertainty of how do we measure, but it's really important. I think, being a data geek, and it
Yeah.
seems like you understand and appreciate the data. We do have to get to a point where we're
Yeah.
measuring and we're setting some level of expectation so a student can achieve that, and then they can be deemed proficient and ready for that next step.
Yeah, the challenge there, like there are industry standards, like you're talking about your daughter. Like there are industry standards, there are industry measures
Yeah.
that can be employed. The problem with that is that it runs up against the status quo of the education system about who is the assessor and what are the assessments. If we bring that into school, using your daughter's example, it may be very likely that she would get through the entire apprenticeship program never having to learn anything around algebra or
Yeah.
it may not be a skill that we have these compacts in society around like the basic level of knowledge we should all have and agreed upon, and some of that stuff may need to evolve because right now I could do any algebra with my voice on my Siri on my phone. Like I could ask it what the Pythagorean theorem is and great. And so there's a bit of a lag as these institutions, meaning like single subject professionals and the institutions that support them, catch up to the reality of industry standards and what the industries need. There's a gap there right now.
So in terms of that gap, and you mentioned something that I think is important is as we start to discover, and I want to tie this back into the whole point of conducting this interview, which is giving those who listen some understanding of what's important if you're launching an ed tech product, whether it's
Oh
AI
yeah.
or not, is the efficacy. And so you're talking about the data sets that come out of the work you do, and you did before you got to the point where ImBlaze was something, right? There was you saw a need and you started
Right.
to build up a data set, and then you said, okay, we need a tool to bring this together to manage it. But
Mhm.
that tool is now providing an even broader data set that
Yeah.
you can draw upon to say, okay, these are the innovations we really need in order to get to the assessment, right? So
Mhm.
you're building that bridge in a very methodical fashion. Does does that resonate and make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, in some ways, compared to other ed tech products, we built backwards. And what I mean by that, and not all, but eh, the platforms that are comparable to what we do, they've gone in and said, okay, data is important, measurements are important. We're going to build a district tool, a school district tool to measure real world or work-based learning. Like we're going to build that. They build that, like the district portal and all of that. And then the bottom stuff, where the educator interacts with it, where the student interacts with it, is sort of an afterthought or not even part of the functionality. Those platforms flounder
Mhm.
because you have to make a priority list of your users. Like, and there's sort of blocker users. If one user isn't using it, the next user won't use it either. Like there has to be an understanding of user journeys, and there has to be an understanding of the problems that those users face in life and how you are solving their problems. If you're not, you're just wasting time for them. And so I think that a lot of ed tech companies, and I've been part of accelerators before, and so I've worked with and mentored a bunch of ed tech company folks, entrepreneurs. Um, they they come at it from that data perspective, which is really great. But if you're not thinking about your UI and your UX, if you're not thinking about the problems you're solving for a student, for a teacher, if you can't define those problems really, really clearly to really help you segment the market and see who are the people you should be working with, then you're not going to get anywhere. You might get a $500,000 sale for a school district or for a state or something like that. Like you might, but the platform is not going to endure. Like you're not going to build on that a legion of adherent users of the platform who feel like it is that it is absolutely indispensable. Like I need this tool to do my job. That's the thing. Like when you hear Uxbridge, like or any of these schools, like when they say things like this tool is enabled us to have an internship program or something indispensable. That's all I want to hear. Like, okay, great. Like what we do outside of that for data reporting and for program improvement and for policy advising is really secondary to practitioners saying this tool is indispensable to running our program. In our case, when principals see the attendance functionality, that they could see where kids are when they're checking in and out for their internship,
Yeah.
there's sort of this like, oh, I can't put that genie back in the bottle. I can't unsee that. Like once they know that there is a tool out there to ensure kids who they're liable for during the school day, like that they could see that they're at their internship when they leave,
That's
like
massive. That's huge.
they can't unsee that.
Yeah.
Like it's not that who cares what's happening there. Like we want them to get to driving it down into like the importance of those experiences. But once they see that piece of functionality, they see that it is indispensable. And they can't, like I said, they can't unsee it. Now there's almost a bit of a liability. Like I can't not use this because this tool exists out there in the world. And so that has been our ticket to success thus far, is just that where now the policies are starting to catch up to also sort of push from that direction, from the top direction as well.
I did some advisement down at Fairfield University. They have a startup program. Fairfield's here in Connecticut where I live,
Mhm.
and uh, the professor that runs the program asked me to come down and be part of a panel and do assess the companies and give them some advice. And one of the things that we talk about is being a must-have versus a nice-to-have.
Mhm.
You just described that so perfectly. It's, it if the person's really not engaging, if it's okay, this does something, but it doesn't, I don't have to do this, then you're not going to get real traction. But like you said, not all of a sudden, you can't unsee that data. You can't unsee the fact that the
Right.
students are checking in and checking out and understanding what's happening. Um, Now it becomes a must-have, and I bet you the principals and the people in charge are checking that every single day and saying, "All right, where's
Right.
David? Is he in? Okay, he did his thing, and now we can, expect him back at school or do that next piece." So if I'm a ed tech provider and I'm looking at what are those things going to be important, measurable, and going to drive success, you just pointed out a really important one, which is, be necessary, be a need to have. But also you talked a little bit, David, about the UI UX, and I'm a big
Yeah.
believer in engagement. Making sure that whatever
Right.
you produce is will engage the people it's
Right.
intended audience. Can you talk a little bit about how you looked at that with ImBlaze and how you made your
Yeah.
product sticky for those students?
Yeah. Well, so this is a bit of a cautionary tale also related to like if you think about people who are entrepreneurs in the ed tech space, if you were to put them in categorize them or stereotype based on them, by and large, they are people who were successful in the existing school systems. Like they navigated the existing. They're not great innovators in that sense then because they're like they personally didn't struggle through the existing system. They're not no, let me take that back. They're great innovators. They're not necessarily great disruptive innovators. Um, because they come through it with the lens of, oh, I can make some tweaks along the sides of this thing called education and make it better. when what we're really trying to do like is recognize there's some fundamental things about public education in the United States that are broken. Like I get to work for a nonprofit, so I could say some of these things. Like there are some things that are fundamentally broken. The notion that um, kids who are digital natives, they are digital natives, right, can learn anytime, anywhere from for free from an MIT professor on YouTube and do all day long really starts to shake the foundation of what teachers do, right? And so like, sure, you could find ways to make their classroom teaching more engaging with better smartboards or whatever, like, but that's not super disruptive.
Yeah.
So to get to the like, so I just want to like flag that a little bit, like, and the other piece I want to flag also is nice to have and must have. Um, you can have nice to have and be really successful if it's really, really nice to have. Like people love, you probably have apps on your phone that you don't need, but you spend time on them, like because they're pleasurable to engage with. And so you better in terms of UI UX, if it's going to be a nice to have, it should be really nice. You know, something that's really engaging and enjoyable for folks to do. And that can be a way to build a lot of success. Schoology started, they gave it out for free, LMS Schoology years ago. They gave it out for free to teachers. And it looked like and it felt like Facebook at a time when Facebook was, pretty preeminent right there. And for teachers, a lot of teachers were on Facebook. It felt like that. And it felt so much different than the existing LMSs that were out there that they started with that approach of just like, you don't need this because you got an LMS, but this is so much nicer. Um, so that's the UI UX is super important. We are lucky because we work in a network of schools. While the majority of ImBlaze customers aren't affiliated with our schools, our network schools, um, we have that base of practitioners and young people to really leverage to learn from. And we're always doing user design testing and user experience testing and stuff like that to get a better sense of that. So lots of testing is really important, which can be hard also if you are an entrepreneur and you just don't have easy access to schools as a place to test. You tend to start to infer what kids need.
So there's a really important point when you talk about inferral versus understanding and really having that measure, right? It's just like we talked about standards earlier, and assessment. There's a measure there. Once you understand some of the data, you can infer certain details, but eventually you have to back it with real data, right? You have to have that assessment that says, okay, you know,
Yeah.
this is as factual as we can get it. We understand it, and this is what's happening, right?
Well, it
Um,
depends on who for whom. Like the other thing is, if the data that you need are for investors, let's just be real. Like if that's different than impact data. Like that's different. Like it's
yes.
different than research data. It's different than pedagogy data around pedagogy. Like it's different. And the reality is that the majority of ed tech products out there are private and for profit, and they're VC or other funding. They have a funding mechanism that expects a rate of return that's 10x or higher. And so you know, what you want then is student eyeballs. You want like I don't care what they do on the platform. I want to be able to say I've got 300,000 users. Great. The loosest measurement of that you possibly can make would be fine. There was a competitor to ours, and I looked at their public data, and they're privately funded, and they're great. And I'm not going to tell you, like, I'm not going to out them for this, but I will say, like, they announced like we have 180,000 students, and uh, and then they listed how many experience they had, how many like actual work-based learning experiences that they had. And when I did the math, I was like, oh, that's about 3 hours per kid on average. So about
Okay.
average 3 hours per kid. So I was like, cool, our numbers are way, 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 way smaller of number of users. But let me run those numbers and see. And ours were 33 hours. Ours was 10x greater the
Mhm.
amount of hours that were kids on average were spending out in the real world. do investors care about that? Like, no, they want the 180,000 users. Like, I get it.
Yeah.
That's reality. So anyway, you're getting me on a soapbox here.
Well, no, it's important that I think people hear that because those numbers are different. And when you talk about because at the when we started this conversation, you were really talking about the pedagogy. You know,
Hmm.
you spent the time to kind of figure this out from, to understand why it's really needed, and the product evolved from that experience, right? Of teaching in Sacramento
Hmm.
and looking at what the big picture learning was trying to do, and now you have a platform, and now you're
Hmm.
taking that experience and that pedagogy and building a product that makes sense, and it has this 10x performance. So one of the things that we're kind of trying to push a button on today and is what drives innovation acceptance. It's not just
Yeah.
innovation for innovation's sake. And so I think you just hit on a big one. Obviously I'm going to do a shameless plug for EdGate and what they do in terms of standards. They work really hard at understanding why standards exist and
Hmm.
how to do the correlation or the alignment of standards to content and provide some of that assessment information at the end of that rainbow, right? And they've been doing this for 27 years, and they've developed patents on their technology and their taxonomy because it's important. But it was all born from educators from
Yeah.
pedagogy that was developed, right? It wasn't just an ed tech provider coming in saying, "Hey, I know I can make money at this." So
Yeah.
it, if you step back
Hmm.
and you say, "All right, pretend to be an innovator who's in a for-profit." Okay, so put yourself in those shoes for a second. How do you approach the market? What do you tell others, and what do you do that's going to drive your product?
Hmm. It's a good question. I think like some of it gets to the values of this hypothetical product or this team or this organization, because it's a worthy goal to say that our value is to get into the hands of 500,000 kids, or like whatever it is. Like there's worthy. I don't. I work for a nonprofit, but I'm pretty psyched about capitalism too. Like I think it's not great, but it's one of the best thing out there. I think there was a quote around that, like whatever capitalism is terrible, the only thing worse is everything else, or something like that. Like so, um, uh, and so what I'm hoping that for profit, what I'm hoping for profit ed tech products are doing is right. Gallup did a survey of I can't remember the number now, but I think it was like 1.5 million students a couple years ago, and it was a student engagement survey. And what they revealed is that between seventh grade and 12th grade, there's
Yeah.
this engagement cliff. You may, yeah, if you, I don't, you may have been familiar with this. And like the engagement level goes to something around 38% around 11th grade, meaning 38% of kids say that they're engaged in their learning. Now I think of that number as like, let's think of that as like the success metric. Like if there's, because from a pedagogy point of view, we all know that if someone's not engaged, they're not really absorbing the content. The standards are great. They might meet the standards, but they might not be retaining the knowledge and gaining wisdom off of that knowledge if they're not engaged. Not they might be, they're not. Like just from a neuroscience perspective, they're not. So I think about that 38% number as like that's the key to me a success metric of schools. If an airline had a 38% on-time performance rating or a 38% safety rating or something, like they'd be out of business, like long ago out of business. Like these are success metrics that
Yeah.
are so low that if you put them into a for-profit mindset around a business, if GE, 38% of their only 38% of their wind turbines or airplane engines worked properly, like long gone, like, like way out of business, bankrupt, long time ago, like out of business. So what I think about to answer your question is, what are if the tool is increasing those numbers, increasing engagement in young people in the school experience, meaning increasing their engagement for those 180 something days that we get them for 12 years, like if we're doing something better with that time in these young people's lives where that something better is being represented by increased engagement that they report, then it's a win. Then it's a good tool as far as I'm concerned. Like like that's the baseline there. Is it increasing their engagement?
That's a absolutely terrific measure. It's funny when I started up Career Path back 10, 11 years ago. One of the things we were trying to do, we were asked to do originally by Valparaiso Law School, was to increase the engagement of the Career Center. And we built a tool that was designed to do just that. It was successful, and we were hired up by Dartmouth, where we actually started the company at that point and said, okay, we got something here because it's engaging, it's getting students involved.
Mhm.
Um, and you know, we did some good things, and we did some things that didn't necessarily work out during that period. But um, I always talk about, I think that the component that we had right was we understood why engagement was important and how to engage those students. It's then translating that into the performance that is expected, right? So if you have them engaged, then where can you go from there? And it sounds like Big Picture is doing a really good job with ImBlaze and the work that you're doing to continue that engagement, to get the kids excited about these internships and providing the outcomes that the schools they're working for are expecting. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's what we hope.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I like the way you say it.
Well, David, I could talk to you for hours. I think this is absolutely fascinating. Um, I would say, is there anything that you would want to leave the audience with that you thought was particularly important today, or that was either said or maybe not said?
Um, Hmm. I think be courageous to think about breaking things in public education. I think the time has come to do some radical acts. And yeah, inblaze.org. Check us out. I'll do my plug as well. Like inblaze.org, check it out, sign up for a demo. We'd love to talk to you all. We are, because it's a nonprofit, we are not pushy. We're more around finding the right partners and finding the right relationships that we can build and help programs do disruptive work.
Well, I'm a huge fan of what you're doing. I believe in internships and apprenticeships. I think there's a massive space that needs to be filled and can be filled by the work that you're doing. So thank you for joining us. This is going to be a terrific webinar coming up. Again, I'll mention
Mhm.
20th. David will be there. Michael Rubin from Uxbridge High School will be there. We'll have a representative from Orgo Math on that, and a representative from Jefferson County out in Ohio who's doing online learning. So we have a really good panel. David, thank you for being with us today, and we wish you a lot of luck with ImBlaze. I hope you continue to spread the word. We'll do our part, and you guys get into another 250 schools here in the next year or two.
Thank you.